Okay. Hello, a very good evening and warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining our session on people and culture. And this has been a much requested session from all of you, so we are happy to be facilitating it. And some of you might already be aware, but for those of you who are new to our webinars, this session is actually part of the larger series that we are conducting on talent and development. The last session that we had conducted was on social sector recruiting. It was facilitated by Anushri from Educate Girls. And for those of you who missed it, we will be happy to share the recording of that session. But back to today's session. So our session today on people and culture, we are hosting it in collaboration with Wisdom Tree. Aditya, if we can move to the next slide. So just introducing Wisdom Tree as well as our speakers for the session today. So Wisdom Tree works with social organizations on culture transformation and leadership through an Indic lens. Their focus is to shift the culture of the sector, and they do this through both cohort-based programs as well as organization-specific interventions. In case any of you have questions about Wisdom Tree and want to know more about the work they do, we do have team members from the organization who are present. So please feel free to ask them more questions at the end of today's session. Also anchoring our session today, we have Abhishek and Sanjay. So Abhishek Thakur, he is the founder of Blue Ribbon Movement and also the co-founder of Wisdom Tree. He has over 15 years of experience in facilitation and design of 50 plus organizations across various sectors and geographies around the world. Very warm welcome to you, Abhishek, and thank you for joining us. We also have Sanjay Dutt. He has over 14 years of experience and he has worked as a consultant and coach across different industries. He is certified in human process facilitation at the Indian Society of Applied Behavioral Science. Thank you, Sanjay, for joining us, and a very warm welcome to you as well. Just want to mention a couple of other points. So the session today is going to be very interactive. So please feel free to raise your hand or even unmute to share your responses. You can also drop any questions or inputs that you have on the chat, and our team will be collating your responses, and we can also raise it to the speakers. The recording of this session, as well as any other additional resources, will be shared with all the participants post the end of today's session. So I think we're all ready to jump in. Over to you, Abhishek and Sanjay.
Thank you. Namaste. Namaste, everybody. Good evening. It is now a tradition to begin our webinars with requesting people to turn on cameras if they can. So just to honor our collective tradition, I'm going to request those of you who can turn on their cameras. Just a few faces will be nice to see. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Abhishek and Sanjay. You've already been introduced. Yeah, welcome to this webinar. It's a taste of our work. It's a taste of our work on culture. It's a topic we're all very passionate about, and yeah, looking forward to playing a bit with you. This is not so much. We're not going to be doing a talk really. We're going to have an interactive webinar. We listen to you. We'll talk, and we'll see what emerges. I think that's the plan. Sanjay, anything before we get started with the check-ins?
No, I'm glad, Abhishek. Just let's get started. Let's create an experience is what it would be, and let's see where it goes. I'm always excited about these kind of events because even as we interact in the next 1.5 hours, we'll create a culture right here, and so I'm looking forward to that.
All right, so let's invite you to share. Just to share, how are you feeling? What's alive today afternoon for you? And what really brings you here? What is it that brings you to this session? We can have some of you who can unmute and share. We can have some who can type it into the chat box. You won't be able to have everybody sharing on mic, I guess, with the time that we have and the number of people. But yeah, what are you feeling right now? How are you feeling? what's alive, and what really brings you here. And maybe I'll get started, and maybe I'll tag you, Sanjay, right after that, and then let's open it up. Uh, I'm feeling happy to see my larger family. I feel social space is like one large हमारी जमात है हम, where all of us, I feel very connected to all of us who are trying to do what we're trying to do. So feeling a sense of anticipation. Why am I here? Because I deeply believe in the idea of culture as a transformational force, especially in our sector. Sanjay, over to you.
Yeah, I'm feeling curious and anticipatory, looking forward to the session. Why am I here? Culture is something that I live, breathe, eat for the last 30 plus years of my experience as both as a leader in an organization as well as a coach and consultant. And so any place that talks of culture, you'll find me there. So I'm here for that.
Sounds good. Manjeet, since you raised your hand.
Hi, I'm Manjeet from Pratham. I'm excited to undergo this webinar, and I'm looking forward to a lot of insights. Why I'm here? Because Pratham is an organization which has more than 7,000 people on ground, and this culture to me is a very interesting factor which binds together and works for people to as to why I'm here, what am I doing here. So I am looking forward to insights so that how do I bind these 7,000 people together in a common culture spread across 28 states in India is a big challenge to us, but we are quite looking forward to insights and more inputs.
Thank you.
Some comments are coming in through the chat. Sunita says, feeling like listening to learn, here to learn. Jyoti says the title is interesting, people and culture. Excited. Leela is excited too and looking forward to take away some insights to handling people and building culture.
A few others. It's nice to hear a few more voices before we jump in.
So, I feel excited to be here because the last time I experienced you, Abhishek, I know there was a conversation, but I didn't know what I took away from there. But while it happened, it was really worthwhile. So I thought I'll get into the experience again, and curiosity brings me here. And the other thing on a serious note is when I work with organizations, I realize that each leader creates his own culture, his or her culture. So many subcultures in the organization. So how do you bring all these leaders together to actually get to talk about a common culture for the organization? I'm still not talking about standardizing culture, but I'm still looking at, something common which connects everybody in the organization. That's my purpose of being here.
Thank you, Jaya. Few more in the chat as well.
Hi, my name is Mangal. Very happy to be here. I've attended a lot of sessions on culture and come back to even more confused. And I'm hoping it's just not that. And I'm because it felt a little different when Satwa sent out the email and when I was reading about it. So I come with this hope to kind of really clarify some of those questions that I have in my head around culture in terms of concretizing it. How do you bring it alive? And more importantly, how do you see it in action? And I also hope that I go back with some more stronger, in-depth questions on culture, because I know it's a perpetual journey of understanding it. So remodeling my mental framework to have more questions and some of those answers is why I'm here. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mangal, I must say that I really love that quest because culture is somehow considered very esoteric, some animal out there which we are exotic thing. Our attempt, yes, would be to make, and it's actually very simple, but then simple things are often the hardest to understand and grasp.
Yes, and we have some more chat responses, so feel free to go through them. A lot of curiosity and intrigue is what I'm picking from the chat responses, which is perfect for us to dive right in. Um, it is also it struck me that we were doing this in partnership with Satwa. So definitely thank you, Satwa, for joining in. And just the word Satwa, right? Which for me means purity, positivity, goodness, and probably originating from truth, right? And if we have to say that one of our quests is to build sattvic cultures or build cultures which begin with sattva and then balance the rajas and tamas, I think I could say that. I think sattvicness, the element of sattva is perhaps what we'd like to infuse. And maybe I can share a little bit about what drives me. Or maybe Sanjay, do you want to go first on what a little bit more on why bother with culture? Kya jhanjat? In a world with so many things you could bother about, why do we bother about culture?
Yeah, so there is something that's very alive for me from today morning, and I left that dialogue which started out as a very abstract dialogue and ended up in a very nice place. So maybe I would bring that in. So I've been working with an organization. This is a business organization, no, not from the sector, but nevertheless, it's a very interesting uh, technology organization which is trying to build, which has built over the last 25 years, a culture where every engineer is, their quest is to make every engineer realize their potential. So it's really an employee first company. And customers, interestingly, are on the same, sometimes there's actually a debate within the management team which is more important, customer or employee, right? So it's that kind of a company. And having worked with them for over a year now, we were at a place where we were doing, I was doing this workshop with the leadership team a month back, and they talked about what is going to be our business philosophy going forward. Because the organization itself is going through a change where the founder is, for 25 years, is stepping back and a professional CEO is coming, and there's a changeover to that. They're becoming more ambitious. They want to do many more things. And so we had a discussion. So what do you want when you say business philosophy? And interesting place that the dialogue landed up on eventually is that the true character of an organization and its people, just like for any human being, shows up when they face difficult choices or difficult decisions. And what is it that would guide us then? What will be those 7, 10, 8 critical principles or values that we will stand by, that will give us clarity and direction when we are there? And to me, that definition of culture was a very interesting and simple way of looking at things. That uh, when you are, so we actually recounted a whole set of critical incidents that have happened in the organization over the last 6 months, saying, yeah, this happened and that happened. How did we react to this? And what did we do then? And the dialogue went there, and it became very clear to us that culture really is a set of principles and values that can guide our behaviors when critical incidents, both kinds of negative connotations and positive connotations happen. So that's what was my insight for the day for culture, and that's my view of it today. It changes every day. So Abhishek, what's yours today?
What is mine today, apart from thinking about sattva? Um, no, I repeated this question to myself as I asked you. And to me, culture feels like the unsolved problem, I think whatever can be measured and can be tangibly held on to can be solved very quickly. You have a logical, linear approach to solving. Culture is a very complex and adaptive system. If I have to use language, culture is complex. It's constantly evolving. Everybody's acting in their own interest, but collectively, sometimes something entirely different emerges. I think for me, just the idea that individually each of us is trying to do their best. And yet, when we come together, at times there is conflict at the interfaces. Something unexpectedly happens and emerges. And how do we shift from that conflict, that struggle, that scarcity, that difficulty, that anyways I feel in our sector, the issues we deal with are challenging enough. How do we shift from there to a space of thriving? I think deep in my heart is the longing to see more and more of us thrive and sustain and do this in a joyful manner, do the work we do filled with a lot of joy and well-being. Because I feel the inner conditions will also create what's outside. So for me, culture, so that we're collectively able to build a field of energy, we're collectively able to create the mahal. एंड ट्रेनिंग वगैरह से माहौल नहीं बदलता, लोग बदलने की कोशिश होती है, बट माहौल जैसा होता है, आई फील अल्टीमेटली वी आर ऑल सब्जेक्ट्स ऑफ माहौल. So to be, yeah, it's a lot about how do you build the space in which the best of people comes forth. I think that would be my
Yeah, what's also bringing to me, Abhishek, as I hear you, is that for me, culture, as I worked more and more in the last 15 plus years with organizations, what comes to me is culture is that space within all of us where the self meets the system and the system meets the self. And what happens in that space is where the inquiry, the more we inquire into that, the more it reveals about the dynamics that you just spoke of. Okay, माहौल नहीं बदलता, लेकिन लोग बदलने की कोशिश जारी रहती है. तो उन दोनों के बीच का जो ये दरिया है, जो बहुत रिच दरिया है एक्चुअली, जिसमें काफी पानी बहता रहता है और बदलता रहता है. How does one get a grasp of it, and how does one hold it? And the only way that I have seen is to do it is कि आप वो पानी को पकड़ नहीं सकते, उसमें उतरना ही पड़ता है. So I think it may be time for us to jump into that too.
jump into the invisible waters, jump into the invisible waters of culture. Yeah. I think so. I think a lot of you also come here also thinking about what are steps that can be taken, and to me just the act of paying attention to culture, the act of showing up to say let's do something about it, the act of paying attention to it itself is a very important first step. And I think this showing up here, starting to pay attention to culture itself is a great first step. So we thought we'll ask you a question about your organizations and maybe start from there. So this is the question. The question is, what is your organization's unique way of making tea? तो चाय तो हर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में बनती ही है, बट हर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का चाय बनाने का तरीका अलग होता है. तो अगर आपके तरीके से, आपके ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के तरीके से, इफ योर ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस वे ऑफ मेकिंग टी, what would that be? What would be your organization's unique way of making tea? So maybe a minute to think, and then yeah. What's your organization's unique way of making chai? आपके यहाँ चाय कैसे बनती है?
Abhishek, this is not how we actually make it, how we want to make it as an organization, right?
Not want, how it actually currently happens. Want to all of us will have
No,
lots of,
and by okay, so
but not literally, figuratively. If you're asking,
yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay, we have some answers, and I'm gonna, yeah, maybe another 30 seconds, a minute to just reflect, and then we can hop into the answers.
So this is Vikram here.
Yeah.
So I'll just share some experience about this person who used to make the chai, not the chai itself. So, and this person was very talkative. So, and is somehow over the time he developed the capability कि अभिषेक को चाय चाहिए उसको ये अच्छी लगेगी and he that person got exactly that और इतने बजे चाहिए तो उसको वो उस टाइम पे मिलेगी. So and that he was doing customizing for everybody. So that was one thing I remember.
Nice. So customized chai for each one, on time and on the day.
At the time, he knows the person feels the need for tea.
Wow. And how many people, Vikram, in the organization that this person was able to do this for?
Easily a few hundred.
Wow.
And he got
What
very
happened, Vikram, when then on a day when this person didn't come?
so the new person had a very big shoe to fill, right? So
Yeah. Swati has a very interesting one. I like that. 2 spoons of knowledge, 1 spoon of action, 5 spoons of care, and 10 spoons of impact.
Kya baat hai. Swati, I was curious, is that everybody's recipe, your recipe, ideal recipe?
So these are our values basically. So I'm from
Oh,
Pyramid Foundation. These four are our values, and we usually, look for these four aspects whenever we interview any candidate. I'm from a talent acquisition team. So, like I said, I would want 10 spoons of impact, and obviously humility, care. I mean, these two are the main aspects we look for whenever we hire anyone in Pyramid Foundation.
got it. And interesting that you have the ratios also. Itna
Yeah,
knowledge.
yeah. In fact, all of us here in our leadership team, they would want someone to be like this.
Good. A good chai should have balance of ingredients. Some others on the chat, Ali Asgar is saying, make one for others too if you're making one for you. Geeta
Sunil,
is saying, yeah, sorry, Sandeep.
Sunil says interesting. Machine made, go and make yours, but the choices are predefined.
Sanjay, that's what I called camouflaged freedom. Looks like freedom, not necessarily is.
Camouflage freedom.
Jayalakshmi is saying, keeping a tab on picky chai lovers, knowing how much to serve whom and not forgetting the coffee lovers. So, inclusion of coffee lovers is appreciated. Don't forget the coffee lovers too.
The curiosity arises in me that as people have written what they have and shared, does it always turn out this way? The way you've written? Common ingredients which everyone will enjoy.
The most, enjoy the most.
Yeah.
Manjeet is saying made differently in different offices, mostly in personalized manner. If no one is there, people make not for themselves but for others also. Taste describes mood of the maker.
So Manjeet, if that was camouflage freedom, as Sunil said, what is this freedom? What would you call this?
So this is absolute freedom. If I'm not feeling too well or too good, I don't hide it, and others can feel that.
Interesting.
Yeah. And very funny to say this, but after drinking the tea, I sometimes walk up to her and ask, "Are you okay? What happened? All well?" Because it does. In reality, I'm just not making jokes, but yes.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You have your talent pipeline building in the chat window.
More than welcome.
So for those who are also figuring this out, maybe a sharper question that might help is, what is making tea the dash way? What is making chai the pratham way? What is making chai the sanja way? What is making chai the quest way? And maybe that will help you sharpen your chai. And yeah, let's hear what is your way. What is the everyone's choices?
Nita says honoring everyone's choice.
I think in parallel also, back to Sanjay's question, does it always turn out this way? I think that's an important question also to hold. One is, of course, the recipe of the chai is in the chat box. क्या हर बार चाय इसी तरह बनती है, बार बार इसी तरह बनती है, या थोड़ा 19-20 other variations?
Yeah, and when there are variations, then what happens? How is it worked with, dealt with?
Meaning, Sanjay is saying, what happens if somebody doesn't follow this way of making chai, कुछ अलग तरीके से बना देता है organization में?
क्या ये सब फॉलो करने के बाद भी
वो चाय नहीं बनती है जो
वो
बनानी
चाय नहीं बनती जो चाहिए? तब क्या होता है?
What happens when? Sure. Yeah. What happens in your organization when this doesn't get followed or it doesn't emerge in spite of following recipe? And also, Nita is saying, obviously, this is aspirational, which is true, and there is a genuine attempt to do this. I think genuine attempts. Yeah, I'm wondering also whether a collection of genuine attempts creates always a genuine outcome, or a lot of times many genuine attempts come together to collide and something else gets prepared. I think that's where I was picking the word genuine attempts. Jaya is saying people don't complain. They have it saying today was not her day. Nice.
Ananya is saying interesting. चाय कैसे भी बने अच्छी बननी चाहिए. जब अच्छी ना बने, then to call that out immediately and understand what went missing.
Instantly call out.
That's an interesting one, Kirti. Some people step out to have their tea and some will try on their own. Yeah. Preeti, would you like to talk about this a little bit? It'll be interesting to hear. COVID pandemic gave us various ways to explore the recipes which will cater to everyone's needs.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sanjay. So this is what I observed in my org as well, that if they have multiple options, they can make it by machine, they can have variety of tea. We have a person who can prepare the tea, else you can enter the kitchen and prepare on your own. But still, there are times when I notice people are like, no, today I'm not feeling like having this tea. I'll step out and choose one particular place where I would like to have the tea. And some people are like, no, I don't like this tea, so I'll give again another shot to it. I'll go and prepare on my own the taste I want today. Not every day, but that is today's need specifically. That आज ऐसा चाय पीना है मुझे, आज यही वाला मन है, कम मीठा चाहिए या अदरक ज्यादा चाहिए वैसा.
Interesting. Preeti, this comment you made about COVID pandemic, I'm also very curious about that. So what are the ways that you learn to cater to everyone's need?
No, this is from Shiva Hiremet from the APD Bangalore. Okay. Shiva Hiremet from APD Bangalore. I have commented on that. Okay. This, yeah, certainly, you know, our the Indian culture. I mean, I'm just taking a little bit of going back with the title what you have kept for this today's webinar. You have kept webinar for culture and people, right? Okay, when you have taken the example, what Mr. Abhishek gave an example, how each organization has a uniqueness to prepare a tea, right? So considering the present last 2-3 years of experience in any one of our organization, so naturally, the kind of, what do you call, the culture has been evolved now. No more serving tea or coffee from one source of your organization. There are various sources have been now developed. As just now, Kirti told, someone told that, see, even each one of us in your own table, you have facilities to have the tea or coffee. So that is the kind of culture is developing. As we like different menus, whether it is sunti chai or coffee powder chai or tea powder or all that. So therefore, I said the kind of the recipe, various recipe we have now presently, we may not find challenge to facilitate that to the everyone needs, is what I mean. So that is the culture. See, you should connect it with what is the kind of the emerging culture in the working space now. Though example is tea, coffee, or whatever it is, that is the kind of emerging culture. So how the question, I'm just going I mean, away from that. I just want to see how this webinar can focus a little bit of what is the kind of, even I mentioned in my expectation. See, there is a culture. We have, as a country, we have our own the culture and the practices and values. Okay, and as generations are different now. I mean, the mix of both, little bit of middle generation, or senior generation, and the young generation. How the cultural balance and values can be integrated with emerging the working pattern. That's what I request. Maybe we have to little bit focus on that and bring the light to that is what I feel. Okay.
Sure. We could go into that. I'll mark that. I'll park that and mark that, and I'll come into the intergenerational one later. Also, thanks for bringing that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, right now I'll pick on what you just said. So I'll just invite the group that as you read through this and hear this, and obviously chai here is a metaphor that we are working with.
Yeah.
What are you learning about culture? What are you learning about this method, that there is this method, right? Of each organization seems to have its own. Right? And how did it come about? What happened that there is that made this happen? How come there are so many ways of doing this? How did we come to this unique place of making something as simple as chai in different organizations? And like to just hear your reflections back on this. And a good place to start would be to look at your own organization. How did this method come about? That all of us implicitly or explicitly agreed on, and this is how it works. How did this come about? What's your guess?
Yeah, I think the question of what's the origin of your way of making chai? I think is that fair, Sanjay?
Yep.
कहाँ से शुरू हुआ? पहली बार किसने बनाया? What's the origin? What was your where did it begin?
Where did it begin and how did it become an understood thing, commonly understood thing?
Yeah, I think wondering based on practices that were observed, core commitments of the organization begins with
with the
one person, founder, and the commitment to that. It came from the vision of the founder, and everyone found a peculiar version of tea with culture to their taste. Okay. Yeah, I think thanks for these pointers. I'm gonna just build a bit on where Ashwin is saying you're not the same parent for your second child. Culture evolves as and when exposure and knowledge is high, team is increasing, and so on. It begins with a few people who are starting the organization, commitment and influence of the core team to transfer the same. They added a sprinkle of herbs and additions of their choice. I think we pay a lot of thought to the origin of several other things. We pay a lot of thought to the origin of purpose. We pay a lot of thought to legal entities of the organization. We've seen that we don't pay enough attention to the origins of culture in an organization. Kahan se shuru hua, right? And what was that when somebody tried out something and started getting replicated across the organization, right? To me, finding the origins of the culture is one of the key aspects to understand why things are the way they are. ये चाय बन रही है अभी इस तरीके से बन रही है, but a little bit of a background of how did it end up becoming like this, right? I think to me, one of the first things about culture is to look back at what's the journey of this culture been, right? As a person who's initiated Blue Ribbon, there have been times in my organization journey where I'm like, this is exactly the opposite of what I was intending to do. मतलब क्या इरादे से शुरू हुआ था और अब क्या हो रहा है, या मैंने पहली बार इस तरह की चाय बनाई थी और अब देखो क्या हो रहा है. The founder, I have privately cribbed about what has happened. And when I trace back the origin, there is no single person who's responsible and raising their hand saying I spoiled it or I shifted the way. It just kept changing in small ways till it became something that was something that I didn't intend. Right. And to me, one of the things that's always been helpful is to trace back to saying, acha, yahan se shuru hua tha, fir dheere dheere this started happening, and then this to this point. To me, in some form, the organizational memory, the organizational history, the origin of the culture has been one of the key factors. ये चाय बनना शुरू कैसे हुई, opening ingredients क्या थे, और फिर किसने थोड़े मिला के आज यहाँ कैसे पहुंची है. I know, Sajjad, does that resonate with you or?
You're asking me?
Yeah. I'm saying, does that
Okay,
history,
sorry.
the origin of the culture?
Yeah, definitely, Abhishek. In my work with organizations, one of the things that I've found very interesting is that I often do diagnosis in organization. What is the culture? How is it operating? And it's very interesting for me that if I sit in the boardroom for a while and just listen to the management team or the board people having a discussion, today my ability to just look at all those patterns and say that 80% of it I get right, saying this is what was likely to be happening in the organization. And vice versa. If I go to the second or the third line and start asking them about what's happening in the organization, I can predict very fairly quickly and easily that what's happening in the boardroom and management team. And the interesting thing in there is that the moment I start hearing this is what happens and that's how it happens and why it happens and what's behind it, it always takes you back to some of the very core principles or core values or core missions that may have been held by that have been held by when the organization started. So I do agree with you that to start understanding culture, the first thing that is needed is to really go back to observing, yes, what's happening today, and then ask the same question that you asked. So how did we get here? What may have been the influences that have got us here? To build on top of what you were saying, Abhishek, that some of us are saying, how do we blend different cultures? How do we handle people and culture? The one thing that I have definitely learned is that you cannot make culture happen. You can understand it. You can create dialogues around it. You can potentially raise questions about it. But it gets built because the inquiry happens. It's not something like a strategy. I want to get here, so much resources, so much this thing, I will have that many dialogues and suddenly the culture will get built. So that's why so I'm extending what you're saying, that inquiry into origins of it is important, to build that mindset of inquiry, and then take it further, saying, so what will it take to build the future? Right. So which is why we are also using this method of engagement with in this webinar, because we want you to get curious about how did I get here? How did my organization get here? Because it's not only about the method and the chai and the output, but also there is something that has happened below that in creating that method. And if you are able to grasp that, that's what gives you leverage to potentially bring changes that you're looking for, whether it may be people related or culture related, strategy related, etc. And so there is a third level. So there is the behavioral level of the chai, the outcome level, etc. There is a method level, and below the method is a whole area of inquiry to do in various areas, which is what culture building is about.
True. And like you said, there are layers and layers. As mentioned, cultural iceberg. I thought I'll share how we look at culture from an integral lens, maybe, but maybe a few more distinctions, and then let me go there. I think one was the origin of the culture. The other for me is really noticing the invisible, right? So a lot of times, अगर चाय अच्छी नहीं बन रही है तो हमें लगता है ingredients replace कर दो. अगर चाय अच्छी नहीं बन रही है तो let's get a different gas, let's get a different chai. But a lot of times we're fixing problems at a certain level, and then we may realize that the person making the chai is not making it with shraddha se nahi bana raha hai, not making it with joy. And you may realize that what makes all the difference is not the ingredients, not the gas, but really the space from where this person's coming. And access to that space, access to bringing their whole spirit forward. You can't engineer that. It can't be, you can't trick a person in the long run to show up with joy. You can't trick a person, or convince a person to show up with shraddha. It only happens, it can only be evoked, right? And to me, culture is how do I create conditions in a way that the person's innocence, sincerity, the person's love for what they're doing is brought forward. So to me, the second insight after the first insight of saying what are the origins of the culture is to look a few layers, like you said, below the manifest things, to look at what is happening. And that Shraddha, akele, alone, everybody is sincere. I feel like, individually, all of us are saints, and all of us are really kind of doing our best, honestly. But when we come together in a shared space, that's when the real challenge starts coming in, right? And culture is about that negotiated shared space, the space between all of us, right? That negotiated space. So how do you pay attention to the invisible? How do you pay attention to the unsaid? How do you pay attention to the norms, to what is okay and not okay? Even though you didn't define it, wo aisa ban gaya, right? So how do I pay attention to what is invisible at any point of time? I think to me, the second would be that, right? To look at the origin of culture. The other is to pay attention to the invisible, to a deeper layer, and seeing its impact on the work, right? And I think all of us do want people to work with ownership. All of us want people to work with passion, excitement. And more and more we are realizing that it cannot be engineered. You can only create conditions for that to happen, right? And I see you nodding, Sanjay. So you.
Yeah, I like the fact that you use the word invisible, because I often find some of my clients calling it intangible. And I have a very strong reaction to that, because to me, culture is very, very tangible. In fact, sometimes more tangible than a strategy or an outcome of an organization. But it's the fact that it is invisible and often hard to witness unless you look for it. So in my work, I often say fish don't talk about water, and that's the invisible, right? That's all around us, and creating a dialogue around it is the beginning of creating the conditions, like you said, right? So that can I talk about all of this stuff that affects us, affects affects the organization, affects the people, whether it be in terms of the spirit, like the shraddha that you said, or in terms of their behaviors, or in terms of how we respond to a certain set of situations. And the more inquiry that we do into it is what starts creating conditions for it. So yeah, so far we've talked about two things, Abhishek. One is deeper layers, and the second thing that you just talked about of Shraddha and the invisible part of thing. There is a third thing that I know is a favorite for you, but let me bring it up this time. One of the biggest invisible that often works in organizations is power and authority. And that is one of the hardest things to talk about in most organizations. Uh, I don't know, I'm not as tuned into the sector, Abhishek, so you and others on the call may have a better view of it, but my own guess is that the power and authority dynamics play equally in both business and non-business organization. And what I mean by that is that how uh, there is the formal power that comes with there being a founder and then a management team and the various layers of it. But then there is also the fact that informal power is exercised by people in various different ways. Things like closeness to founder, things like who's been longer in the organization, things like who's more competent, seen as more competent in the organization. Some of these things came up in the chai story, for example, right? The camouflage freedom versus absolute freedom. Now that says something about the power structure in the organization. So I think the third lens that I definitely encourage anybody who is wanting to study or wants to become a student of culture like I am is to focus on power and authority dynamics very, very significantly, because they not only tend to be invisible, they also tend to be taboo to talk about.
Yes, totally up my alley. Talking about the unspoken and the unspeakable. I think to me, it's also, while it's also about power, what I'm taking away is every organization has some of these unspeakables that move from the common to the grapevine. And really, what is happening in the grapevine, what's happening outside the light, is also equally shaping the culture. What's happening outside the room or out there and saying, "Yaar, ye chal raha hai, yahan ye chal raha hai," and that what is unspeakable in the organization drives the organization as much as what is spoken. And power very often moves, like it's impolite to talk about power in collective spaces. So you go out and say, यार ये तो इसके हिसाब से ही चाय बनती है यहाँ पे, या ये हर बार यही होता है, right? And those are the pockets of cynicism. Those are where small pockets of what you'd not want, dispassion and all begin. So I think to me also, Sanjay, what I'm hearing from power is also the attending to the unspoken and unspeakable, right? Where power features top on the list for me.
Yep.
So, sorry, Sanjay.
There's one more dimension that I want to bring in. It sounds very cliched and hackneyed probably, but there is never ever have I found in culture work that the need to not talk about it, and which is the simple process of communication. Often what is imagined in the head office and how it shows up in the field, especially, we heard of organizations like Pratham, Manjeet talked about like 7,000 people right now. The fact that something gets, some change gets envisaged at the head office and now it needs to be taken all the way down. And to me that designing for that communication, uh, and more importantly, how's that communication landing is something that I often find in culture work goes missing. I love the George Bernard Shaw quote, which goes something like this, saying that the biggest challenge of communication is that people think it has happened. So just because I've said it, it's gone there, right? But how has it been taken? How has it been understood? And that mechanism from the field to the top is something that I often find is one of the very strong, but it's very simple way of really shaping culture. And it is hard work. It is repetitive work. but it is very rewarding work that wherever I've seen organizations do that.
True.
And one thing that I wanted to share here is when I'm hearing Sanjay talk about communication. So there are times, when people are asked to do something and people ask, at the lowest rung, why are we doing this? What's the purpose of doing this? Nahi, ye to upar se aaya hai. So, that communication that starts from the senior management with a certain purpose and all, that gets diluted as it goes down, and that creates the maximum rift there. And that's something. And also, people think that the senior management is very good. What is wrong is the middle management. So they are the people, who need to really buck up.
Yeah.
So that is also there.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
And yeah, that's a great example of how power and communication gets mixed up. That upar wale to achhe hain, but beech wale, right? So there is already a power dynamic there that we are talking about. So, yeah. Manjeet, you wanted to share an example. How about doing that?
3 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was about I think it was during that COVID time, and everyone faced those tough times. We were no exception. And suddenly we saw a big dip in donations being received. And because our core work is aligned around donations received and projects being executed, so we could clearly see that there was big dip because CSR donations were going to the Prime Minister Fund or other funds. And the challenge at that point of time was that, with the amount of funds available, one option was to let go of certain teams, and which nobody was comfortable. So the leadership decided that we would not like to let go of people at this difficult time, because this is difficult. They won't be able to go out or find jobs. And what everyone at the leadership level, very top leadership level, the decision taken by the CEO and some of the senior people was that let's take a pay cut across, and not just one person, but across. And then how the decision was taken and communicated, we didn't realize at that point of time, but a few months down the line, we realized that how important the communication and how you communicated was. So we took then next 50 to 60 important key leaders in all these states and programs were taken into confidence, explained previous year's budget, current year's, the rationale of why this decision is being taken was explained to them with clear-cut numbers in front of them, that this is the situation. What do you think we should be doing? Anonymously, everyone agreed that a pay cut across. Then and it was all happening keeping the board in the loop. Then the decision was that how do you reach out to 7,000 people to intimate this? One way was that, okay, you send out emails, which many companies did, that okay, your contract is terminated or this and that. We were hearing all of that. What we did was we again created a cadre of about 250 people and 250 senior people, team leaders who were managing some teams or other. Same process of showing the budget, the availability of funds, different options available. What do we do? So it was done in a cascading manner. A note was written so that same messaging is going to each team member. A note was given, made, inputs taken from different people, note finalized, everyone, got on different calls, but same messaging. And people from national leadership were taking turns to attend these calls, which were done with the last person as well. So, and we ensured that not on any Zoom call, there can't be more than 50 people in one lot. So for example, in UP, if I have a 650 workforce, we ensured that there are at least 13 to 14 calls so that you can take questions from them. You can answer their concerns. So, and the exercise took 1 month, but the end of it, not even one person said, I'm not ready for the cut. And that was the beauty of it. And what we found was that by end of it, there was energized. Instead of worrying about how my house will run, of course there were worries, but we found that the commitment towards the work and towards the organization was far greater by end of this 1 month. So how you communicate, what do you communicate? That communication, why are we doing this? That why, if people understand, they are far more, flexible, and they're far more understanding than we assume they are.
True. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, sorry, Majid, you were saying.
No, I'm saying that, and by the end of it, some of the very gracious board members agreed to, contribute their personal donations, so that we didn't, at the end of it, we didn't have to go through with the pay cut, but the process and the communication, that was one big learning exercise for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing such a beautiful thing. And yeah, I think what stands out always as a culture lens is how you went about doing it, right? What the message was is there, but communicating the why, and how do you communicate the why? I think doing it so rigorously, so intentionally, so sincerely, I think that itself touches people in a very deep way, that this organization really cares. And somehow, if I've seen that when we start paying attention to the how, then the what doesn't stay as important. The what loses its potency because you're paying attention to how you are doing things. And to me, when we asked how do you make chai, the operating word was how, right? Because culture is really in 3 alphabets. If I have to take culture, it's how. In 4 alphabets, it's love, but in 3 alphabets, it's how. How do we do things? So, so I wanted to just this chai exercise, just to tie this down so that you can take it back into your organizations, is really to start with a very simple question. Hamare organization mein, if you don't want chai, you can pick up something else that tends to happen. But how does this happen? What is hamara tarika kya hai? What is our unique way of doing this? And just to hear people out, in terms of what do they have to say in their sensing of the way. And a lot of times you've seen very interesting and diverse views actually coming out of this. And that itself is the starting point of how do we do things? How do we do things out here, right? And culture is a lot about just paying attention to how do we do things, right? Three things that we spoke about after that, and Kejal, if you can also paste that in the chat. When you talk about chai, one is the origins. How did we end up being here, right? ये chai ऐसे कैसे बनना शुरू हो गई? So you see all the way from the founder to the different waves and the history of the organization, the memory. So that would be one. Exploring the invisible, that किस स्पेस से ये चाय बन रही है, किस श्रद्धा से, कैसे जो बना रहा है वो किस स्पेस से बना रहा है, and is it so the how there, right? The invisible. And third is kind of the unspeakable. Hamesha ye chai conversation mein there'll be something that catches your attention, like camouflaged freedom caught our attention. There will be some kind of a reference that will be out of the ordinary, worth exploring, and that's where the opening for the unspeakable lies. So these three is what I would kind of invite you as a mini chai workshop to take away in your organizations. Sanjay, anything on this before we move to integral?
Yeah, I can't overemphasize the thing about how, Abhishek, that you said, because there's a lot of brilliance in organizations, usually with great leaders, lots of intellect, lots of commitment, passion, etc., etc. So the what and the why often is easier to come up with. You'll do a 2-day workshop and come up with a vision and values and all of that. And it's always a very interesting moment for me that in the last 2-3 hours of the workshop, when I turn to the group and say, now tell me, how will you do it? And actually the workshop starts then. So the what and the why is the easier part, that often in this world where there's a lot of knowledge and skill anyway available on tap, but it's really figuring out how will we get down to, like Manjeet described, to the 650 people in UP, and how will we do that? And that conversation is what builds cultures and builds organization.
Yeah,
Great.
and
So,
this is very easy to understand, the result. This is what we achieved. But what made you achieve that result? What actually drove you? What is inside of you that created this? I think those are the conversations that get missed.
Yep. Yep.
absolutely. So I quickly wanted to give a simple frame on diagnosing whether a problem is a culture problem or is it a behavior problem, is it a systems problem, is it an internal motivation problem. Diagnosing a problem and categorizing whether this is a problem that needs solution from a culture lens. I think that's one thing that I wanted to share, because that will also help you understand whether is this problem to be solved from a culture lens or there are other lenses, right? Sometimes the problem is that the office space is too cramped and that's leading to something, and it's not a culture problem, it's a physical space problem. Of course, it manifests in the cultural quadrant, but the answer may not lie there. So one of the frames that we use in our work, and some of you would have also heard this, is the integral frame. Right, larger body of knowledge is integral theory, and one of its primary frames looks at 4 quadrants. So it looks at 2 axes. The first axis is the individual and collective axis, right? So there is the individual and there's the collective. That's kind of one particular axis. The other axis is the interior and exterior axis. So there is a interior and an exterior, right? So this gives us kind of the classic 4 quadrants. In the individual exterior, that is things that can be attributed to the individual and they're visible, right? This would be the place where we would talk about behaviors, right? A lot of the behavioral training, skill-based training, working with the individuals, a lot of that work falls here. In the individual interior, I would say inner states, mindsets. This belongs to the individual and it's in the inner world of the individual. That's what's going on within them. And sometimes you can impact that as well. The collective exterior is the quadrant of systems, right? Information systems, physical systems, whichever systems are at play. And sometimes the problem belongs to policy systems. They're kind of measurable, they're exterior, they're visible. And culture sits here in the collective interior, what's called the collective interior. Right. So when you look at any kind of issue and when you diagnose an issue, a lot of times the issue sits somewhere and the response to it can be from somewhere else, right? So a lot of times, let's say there is a question around funding, and we may find that the challenge sits in training people on how to fundraise because that's a behavioral challenge. Or it could set in terms of systems, saying, are we tracking our donors correctly? Are there funnels and so on? Or it could rest in the inner states and mindset, saying, oh, do we deserve? There's an inner kind of individual's inner, am I worthwhile? Am I worth, do I have the capacity kind? But there may be sometimes when there's a collective culture of disbeliefs, collective cynicism, कि तो नहीं हो पाएगा, right? The unsaid assumptions that everybody shares. Now that would be a culture problem to solve, right? A lot of times, some problems we tend to solve them because with tools which are easily available. So training is very easily available. So we're like, let's train people to do this. Let's train people. But some of this doesn't belong to the training quadrant. Some of this belongs to our unsaid collective agreements. And just shifting those individual behaviors somehow just doesn't shift the collective agreement that people are behaving with. Right. And so a lot of these problems belong to the unsaid collective agreements that people are stuck into. And the last thing I'll say is cultures are viral. So if one person gets stuck into a certain behavior, it evokes the similar behavior from someone else and someone else. And before you know it, the space has become unsafe. One person's being inauthentic. It makes it easier for the other person to be inauthentic. And slowly the space goes into an inauthentic space or an unsafe space and so on. So culture problems are therefore, or culture is a place from where you have leverage over the other three also, because all these quadrants are interrelated. And some of these belong to the culture space. Sanjay, any quick thoughts that you want to add to this?
So more than a thought, Abhishek, the question would be, so how do I recognize, what would be the signs that will tell me that I need to do culture work?
I think for me, when a problem is not manifesting in just some individuals, because if it's an individual issue, I may address it through training, coaching, and it's a problem with the individual. But if this problem is being seen as a pattern, as a collective habit, as being in the mahal, in the atmosphere, in the vibe. So for me, first I identify whether it is an individual specific issue or does it belong to the system. And the second is it visibly, can I visibly impact it? Can I impact it just by shifting something in a visible way? And if that's not the case, then it's a culture problem because it's in the collective invisible. Mostly we find culture problems because people have tried everything else. The tangible sides are very easily available. So they've tweaked around policies. They've tried workshops with individual training things. So whatever is left, we always feel the residual problems belong to culture because it's the beast that people touch the last, right? And so yeah, agar nahi ho raha hai inse to bacha hua problem is the culture problem. That's how I would say it. I don't know what's your answer to this.
Yeah, it's similar. So I the way I think of it or name it is anything that is repetitive. Repetitive in the sense in time or space. So if you find the same problems coming up again and again, time after time, month after month, or in space that, as you said, it is spread across the organization in different departments, different silos, we start seeing the same sense of, lack of performance, lack of commitment, passion, team issues, etc. That's the time to look at saying, hey, look, this is becoming collective. This is no longer about a particular individual. It is not a one-time event. So any repetitive pattern to me is the place to look at culture. So some of the people issues, like you said, that may not necessarily belong to the culture because they may be happening to certain individuals or certain functions or departments. So my lens would also, and culture work takes a lot of conscious energy and attention. So it's also about really taking a educated call on it, saying is this something that we wish to touch, and are we willing to make that energy and investment into this? It takes a lot of faith to work through this. And simply because a lot of it is invisible, it is about unspeakable, you don't know what will come next. You install the next ERP tool, or you install to put a new system or process for handling problems, etc. Those are like quick, they look like quick fix things, predictable things, but here you have to go down a path that may be invisible, unspeakable, but definitely a lot more rewarding eventually. But it takes a lot of faith.
True. Maybe we'll take one or two questions and comments before we go ahead. I think Jay is saying, I've seen that confrontation is not okay in one of the organizations. If someone raises a disagreement, the CEO immediately steps in. And that, I think, ripples into the organization. I would assume that disagreement to Koro mat CA, the CEO will kind of be upset. And would that be right to say, because the CEO is actively discouraging confrontations?
Yep.
Yeah.
I can so relate to it there. I'm working with an organization where my meeting with L&D head, HR head, and CEO happens separately because everybody is so bothered about we shouldn't trigger off the CEO.
And I think the interesting thing is the disagreement doesn't disappear. Like to me, at such times, leaders are like children who say, if I shout, the disagreement will disappear. It's only relocated. And in fact, it's relocated to the shadows. It's relocated to a place where it has a life of its own and you cannot do something about it. It takes roots into the unconscious of the organization, in the grapevine. impact the organization. No escaping. No escaping some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think to me, what we are learning is that every organizational challenge, and particularly the big ones, challenges of scaling, challenges of transformation, challenges of leadership and succession planning, each of these has a culture component, because each of these impacts the culture and requires the culture to be supportive for that change to happen. In a very esoteric way, I would say it requires the blessings of all the beings involved in the organization for it to be allowed to happen. And if those blessings are not present, if that buy-in, that willingness is not present, there'll be invisible forces that will resist those changes. Right. And if those blessings are present, if that buy-in, that ownership is present for any shift that the organization wants to make, there's just a positive energy towards making that happen, because we've considered each person's wisdom, each person's perspective. The reason we call this wisdom tree is precisely because cultural wisdom is collective. It's not expertise-based wisdom. Each person is an expert because they live in the culture on a daily basis. And our job as wisdom tree is to surface that collective agreement, that collective wisdom, and build the energy to make the shift. If you only solve the other three quadrants and don't solve the culture quadrant, it'll pull back any shift that the organization wants to make.
And I just want to add, Abhishek, I'm assuming some of us are here because we want to see culture change happen, or maybe we ourselves want to make culture change happen. And should I share the bad news or the worst news first?
You start the bad first and then the worst. Then
the bad news is that if you want to be an agent of change, an agent of culture change, it's going to take a lot of work on yourself. Because the being in that space of being inside the system and yet calling out the unspeakable, invisible, and facilitating that process is a lot of work on self that's required. Even today, after 15, 17 years of doing this work, I have my own mentors, my own peers who I go to and share my dilemmas, and have to work with my own self to be able to do this work. So the curiosity is a good start, but it's definitely. But if you're planning to do culture work, be prepared to do a lot of work on yourself, because the beliefs and assumptions you hold and what their dynamic with the beliefs and assumptions of others become very important to look at. I joked, of course, bad news, worse news, but the good news in all of this is there is a method to the madness. Personal change and being an agent of change can be worked on. And that's where Wisdom Tree and some of the offerings that Wisdom Tree has comes in, which can help you change, so that you can help the system that you belong to also change. Maybe.
Yeah, thanks. I think the personal change bit is non-negotiable for culture champions. Those who want to influence culture can't themselves not be infused with that culture, or radiating the energy of that culture. Definitely that. I wanted to just take a few minutes to also move into, before we take any final questions and comments, maybe honoring time. What we do at Wisdom Tree is really try to build this capacity for organizations. We try to work with organizations over a 9-month period, and work with few people from the organizations, help them with the tools we have, an understanding of culture, and actually work with the live culture of their organization. That's the program that we found our best way to communicate what we know is through this program. We call it Developing Leaders, Designing Cultures, DLDC for short. And in very specifically, yeah. So making cultures resilient, sustaining the organization, because again, we feel short run way you can get the organization to do a lot. But in the long run, if you truly want to infuse the behavior, you need to shift the culture of it, right? And healthy and prospering, I think for us, a thriving culture is key. So we have a 9-month journey that we do. We do some labs, like Sanjay said. The people who are changing culture need to themselves be transformed. We work with the organization itself. So building capacity of leaders, actually taking a problem in the organization and shifting it. And we handhold through the whole process. So some coaching, mentoring, really building culture champions within the organization. And yeah, we really believe that that's the way to thrive. That's the way to create culture, attract talent, some culture tools, conceptual understanding, and yeah, we've done this for a cohort, and with great results, and be great to talk to participants who've been through this journey. And I think we have a cohort starting not very soon, but soon. In August, we'll be starting our next cohort. So thought I'll share a bit about DLDC. So we have a few minutes. We have 5 minutes for any other questions, reflections, comments. Sanjay, do you want to add anything else?
No, I'm good. I think we have 5 minutes. I'm curious to hear any reflections back, any thoughts and feelings that have got triggered through this process. I know we may not have answered all your questions, but I hope we have been able to bring in a lens that can begin the process of looking at some of the challenges, problems that you are facing in your organization.
Yeah. No, thanks for the word lens, Sanjay. I think one last thing I wanted to share was that culture as a lens is like culture first. It doesn't exclude training. It doesn't exclude OD. All those are necessary. And the wisdom of tree approach is to say, let's start with culture and then arrange these elements. I think that's the lens. So we'd love to hear what thoughts this evoked. If any pressing questions are there, what are you left with this conversation? Again, you can unmute and share. That would be lovely, or the chat box.
Okay, so one of the things that I'm coming to is not giving up. Yeah, because culture has to do with people. It has got to do with Shraddha. It's got to do bringing out the best in people. And, I think never giving up is what is coming to me right now. Not giving up ever. Yeah.
Great.
One of the challenges I face is people saying that they want to change culture, but it's just something that's just said, and nobody really wants a change, and nobody wants to work towards a change, right? And so, have you come across situations like that? And is it even worth going and trying to work with that kind of a team?
I can respond to that maybe, and then Sanjay can add. Yeah, I think people's stated position very often is we want change, but there's unwillingness to take responsibility for the change. And there is fear of what this change will mean for me. What we've found is if we open up the space for people to authentically talk about their fears, authentically talk about what are their stakes in the change happening or resisting. I think to me, it has been a lot of creating safe spaces, open conversations, negotiation. When people start having a say in what is going to happen, we've found people shift and take ownership, right? But that work to truly get them on board is in fact the work of culture. It's the work that we do as Wisdom Tree also, right? So I think within each person there are hidden anxieties, there are hidden fears, and if they are surfaced and collectively spoken about, collectively negotiated, I think we unlock a lot of energy. That's what I would say. So it definitely is worthwhile and happens all the time.
Great, thank you.
Just add to it, I know this might sound sacrilege, and especially in the social sector space that we are in right now. Culture cannot be built from a place of activism. Any work, Vikram, that you said about working with it, right? So if it becomes your agenda to change it, or then there's a problem, because then it doesn't become everybody's agenda. So the one thing, practical thing that I would say that is needed is to be very pragmatic about any culture change work, to recognize that there are power dynamics, recognize that there is an need to align people to have that conversation, to start that conversation even. If people don't buy into it and we push it as activists, it will really ever succeed, and in fact may even become frustrating and cynical as a process.
Right.
Sure. Evangelizing is important, but activism is not.
No. Thank you for articulating that.
Thank you. Thanks, Abhishek, Sanjay.
Just one last thing I wanted to share. That I think two things. One is we'd love for you to take the chai question in your organization, and we put in the 3 sub questions after the chai question, exploring the origins, exploring the invisible, exploring the unspeakable. So I think we'd invite you to run these micro workshops if you can. And there is a expression of interest form in the chat box for those of you who are interested in developing leaders, designing cultures. And lovely to see a lot of you there. And thank you, Satwa, for having us.
Thank you,
Thank you
sir.
so much again, Abhishek, Sanjay. I think this has been quite a reflective session for all of us, especially, the reference to chai. It's something that everyone can relate to. So I think that was really useful, and I'm sure everyone's going back with a lot more to think about. We can have maybe a couple of more minutes in case somebody does have any questions. And then we can wrap up the session. Of course, a recording of this, and in case there are any other additional resources, we'd be happy to share once we close. And please do take out 2 minutes to fill out our feedback form. It would really help us plan for more such sessions in the future. So yeah, in case anyone has any closing thoughts, we can close with that. There's feedback already coming in on the chat as well. So. Also, to the team at Wisdom Tree, in case there is any email that we can share with the participants, if they have any further questions and would like to reach out to you. We'll be happy to share.
Even if you have any culture queries that you want to just sound out, feel free. We're a part of this larger family of all of us. So if you want to ever just check in, just sound out. If there's something you're thinking, you want a perspective, just drop us a mail. Be happy to kind of reflect back to you what we think. So feel free to reach out.
Okay, but thanks again, everyone, for joining, and as well as the speakers. I think we can close the session now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your time and attention.